On October 2nd, 1999, around 11:30 in the morning, two men were fishing at a campsite along the Big South Trail, part of the Arapahoe and Roosevelt National Forest in Colorado, when they stumbled upon a very young boy. Running into a child all alone in the middle of nowhere was definitely concerning. But the fishermen noticed a group of hikers about 80 to 90 feet ahead. They assumed the boy belonged to that group, especially after a quick conversation with him before he ran off toward the hikers. That boy was 3-year-old Jared Attadero, and it was the last time anyone ever saw him. To understand how a 3-year-old ended up in such a situation, we need to rewind and look at the life of his father, Alan Attadero. Alan was a divorced single dad raising his two kids, 3-year-old Jared and his 6-year-old daughter, Jocelyn. Earlier that year, Alan had gotten deeply involved with a local religious group called the Christian Singles Network. By October, he was hosting 11 members of this group, along with his two kids, at a resort he co-owned with his brother. On the day, everything went wrong. The kids wanted to go on a trip to visit a fish hatchery with the group. Alan was hesitant at first, but eventually gave in after the group promised they'd only go to the hatchery and bring the kids right back. But for reasons that still aren't clear, the plan changed without Alan's knowledge, and the group ended up starting a 15-mile hike along the Big South Trail around 10 a.m. Taking two young kids on such a long hike without their dad's permission was the first big mistake. The second, and arguably the worst, was that no one in the group took explicit responsibility for the kids. Everyone just assumed someone else was watching Jared and Jocelyn, but in reality, no one was. To make things even worse, the hikers had split into two groups, the faster walkers and the slower ones. This separation made it almost impossible to keep track of the kids. About an hour and a half into the hike, Jared briefly interacted with the two fishermen before running off toward what they thought was his group. This is where things get a little unclear. It's hard to say whether Jared was between the two hiking groups, or if he had already passed them entirely. The hikers the fishermen saw might not have even been part of the same group. Sadly, this was the moment Jared disappeared. It wasn't until 12:15 p.m. that the Christian group realized they hadn't seen Jared for over an hour. Panic set in, and some members rushed back to the resort to tell Alan. He didn't waste a second. He drove frantically to the trail, beating his chest and repeating, "They lost my baby! They lost my baby!" Meanwhile, the resort manager filed a missing person report and got the park rangers involved. Since this was a popular hiking trail, the rangers had plenty of experience finding missing people. In fact, the sheriff at the time said, "I absolutely thought we'd find him. Yes, it was a child, but I figured we'd get in there, do what we've done hundreds of times, and find him. It might take a few hours. Maybe the kid would be crying or hiding nearby, but we'd have him before midnight." He even told his team to wake him up when they found Jared. But that call never came. After almost a full day of searching, Jared was still missing, and the hope of finding him alive started to fade. Things got even worse when the helicopter searching for him stalled 100 feet in the air and crashed, injuring everyone on board. By October 7th, over 200 professional searchers, a dozen dog teams, trackers, a dive team, and a plane were all working tirelessly to find Jared or at least some clue about his disappearance. Tragically, after 5 grueling days with no leads, the search was called off on October 8th. The story blew up in the media and even led to Colorado's governor signing the Amber Alert Plan into law. But Jared's case went cold until June 4th, 2003, when two hikers, Gary Watts and Rob Osborne, found some tattered clothes and a sneaker about 500 feet above where Jared was last seen. They immediately connected the dots and contacted the authorities. What followed was a more thorough search of the area. 10 days later, searchers made a grim discovery: a molar and part of a human skull. DNA tests confirmed what Jared's family had feared. The remains were his. The clothing found nearby also matched what Jared was wearing the day he disappeared. After nearly 4 years of uncertainty, Jared's family finally had some closure. But even with these discoveries, the question remains: what really happened to Jared? The simplest explanation is that he wandered off into the mountains, got lost, and eventually died from hypothermia. But there's a problem with that theory. The area where his clothes and remains were found is nearly inaccessible. It's steep, rocky terrain that would be tough for an adult to navigate, let alone a 3-year-old. A more plausible theory is that he was attacked by a cougar. These predators are native to the area, and while they rarely attack humans, a small child could easily become a target. During the investigation, some of the hikers in the 11-member group reported hearing a distant scream around that time, including Jared's sister, Jocelyn. If the cougar theory is true, it could explain both the scream and how Jared's remains ended up so far from where he was last seen. But there are some inconsistencies with the animal attack theory that are hard to ignore. For starters, researchers didn't find any blood or cougar hair on Jared's clothes. How is that possible? Even more puzzling is the fact that Jared's pants were found inside out. I can't think of any logical way a cougar, or any animal, for that matter, could turn a pair of pants inside out. And then there's the condition of the sneakers they found. They were in surprisingly good shape, considering they'd supposedly been through 4 winters in the Colorado mountains. All of this points to a far more disturbing possibility. Jared might have been abducted and later killed by another person. The sneakers could have been in such good condition because the kidnapper scattered Jared's remains on the mountain years after the incident. I know it's a horrifying thought, but it's the only explanation that accounts for all these strange details. Unfortunately, even with all the evidence, Jared's case remains as much of a mystery today as it was the day he disappeared. The truth about what happened to him may never be known. On March 21, 2010, the Gabra family returned home to Mexico after a trip. That evening, the parents tucked their 2 daughters into bed, not knowing it would be the last time they'd see one of them alive. The next morning, the family's nanny, Erica, went into 4-year-old Paulette Gabarra-Ferra's room to wake her up, only to find the bed empty. She searched the room thoroughly, turning everything upside down, but there was no sign of the little girl. Frantic, she alerted Paulette's mother, Lizette Ferra, who immediately called the authorities. The investigation into Paulette's disappearance began right away, but this case was unlike anything the authorities had seen before. Paulette had severe physical disabilities, so she couldn't have gone anywhere on her own. Yet, there was no evidence of a break-in or kidnapping. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. After exhausting all options, the Attorney General's office created posters explaining Paulette's situation and plastered them all over the region. Lizette's sister, Arlette, also shared photos on social media, and the post went viral, turning Paulette's disappearance into a national story. That evening, Lizette made a televised plea to anyone who might have taken her daughter, begging them to return Paulette to a public place like a shopping center and promising not to press charges. But despite all these efforts, there was no sign of Paulette. That is, until 9 days later, on March 31st, when Paulette's lifeless body was discovered, right back in her own room. She was found stuck between the mattress and the foot of her bed. On the surface, this should have been the end of the case. But the inconsistencies surrounding her disappearance were too glaring to ignore. How could no one have noticed her body just feet from where she was supposed to be sleeping? The Gabra home had been searched by professionals, including highly trained dogs. How could they have missed something so obvious? And perhaps the most baffling question: how did no one notice the smell? As one YouTube commenter pointed out, "I found a body once. It was in a basement apartment, and we went to check on her because of a smell complaint. Flies were everywhere, and they were huge. The smell was thick, and it stuck to everything. It was a hot and humid summer, and she had been dead for 3 days. There's no way Paulette was in that room for 9 days. The smell of death is something that lingers and spreads everywhere. If Paulette's room had been sealed off immediately after her disappearance, the whole situation might have been chalked up to investigator incompetence. But that wasn't the case. In reality, the room had numerous visitors in the days following her disappearance, including guests who slept in the same bed where her body was later found. Lizette even gave an interview sitting on that very bed. How could she not have noticed? The only logical explanation is that Paulette's body wasn't under the mattress during the initial searches. Instead, it was placed there later, possibly by one or both of her parents. According to the official coroner's report, Paulette had moved on her own, fallen headfirst into the gap between the mattress and the bed frame, and suffocated before her nanny, Erica, came to wake her that morning. But the evidence contradicting this official statement is overwhelming. For example, when rescuers found Paulette, she was wearing dark trousers with a pink giraffe pattern. Yet, just days earlier, Lizette had shown those same trousers during an interview while displaying Paulette's belongings. Even more troubling, the official video of the body's discovery revealed multiple bloodstains hidden in the sheets, some as large as a soccer ball. At one point in the video, an investigator even remarks, "They," referring to the parents, "were beating up the kid." Despite this, the official report ruled out physical abuse and made no mention of the bloodstains. When these details came to light, it sparked widespread outrage in Mexico, leading to Alberto Bazbaz resigning as Attorney General of the state of Mexico. Based on what I've read, everything about this case suggests a cover-up by the authorities. It's possible that one or both parents accidentally killed Paulette during an altercation and then orchestrated an elaborate scheme to hide their crime while also capitalizing on media attention. For this to work, someone high up in the investigation would have had to be involved. Of course, this is all speculation. There's no concrete evidence to prove wrongdoing by the parents. Unfortunately, we may never know what truly happened to Paulette that night unless someone with insider knowledge comes forward. But after 14 years, that seems increasingly unlikely. That said, if the parents were responsible for this tragedy, they wouldn't be the first. Something eerily similar happened in the next case I'm about to share. On July 25, 1996, Yen Meadows visited the Rivergate Mall in Goodlettsville, Tennessee, to sell crafts at a flea market. After parking her car, she opened the back door to let her 3-year-old daughter, Lucy, out. She then went to the passenger side to grab some crafts she planned to sell. But when she returned to the other side of the car, Lucy was gone. Yen immediately contacted mall security, and they conducted a thorough search of the mall and surrounding area. Despite their efforts, Lucy was nowhere to be found. In the weeks that followed, police dedicated hundreds of hours to the case. They interviewed over 100 witnesses and relatives, followed up on tips, spoke with parents of children who resembled Lucy, and reviewed surveillance footage from the parking lot. The footage, however, was too distant to provide any useful clues. It did show Yin wandering the parking lot, seemingly searching for someone. But even after all this effort, they found no trace of Lucy. Things took a darker turn when police began investigating Yin herself. For context, Yin was a Korean immigrant who had separated from her husband, Tom, and was living with another Korean woman, Han Shin-dae, also known as Tammy. In her initial statement, Yin claimed she had only looked away for a few seconds, and that was all it took for Lucy to disappear. She said she opened the car door, walked around to the trunk, and when she returned, Lucy was gone. But a couple of weeks later, she changed her story, saying she might have been distracted for 10 to 15 minutes. This was a significant discrepancy. As the lead investigator pointed out, if they had known the disappearance window was 10 to 15 minutes instead of under a minute, they would have conducted a much more extensive search from the start. This sudden change in Yan's story made her a prime suspect. She was given 2 polygraph tests, both of which she failed, and afterward, she became reluctant to cooperate with investigators. Around the same time, a neighbor reported seeing Lucy wandering outside early one morning, not dressed for the weather and crying. Police also questioned Yan's housemate, Tammy, whose statements didn't fully align with Yan's, adding to the suspicion. The FBI and local police then launched an extensive investigation. Despite an extensive search of the Meadows house, farm, and surrounding area, investigators found no evidence against Yen or Tammy. The case went cold, leaving no leads for the next 18 years. Then, in November 2004, a witness came forward. He claimed he had seen Lucy lying on the floor at home, wrapped in a blanket, looking as though she could have been dead a day before her supposed disappearance. While police never released the witness's name, many believe it was Daniel, Tammy's son, who would have been 11 years old at the time of the incident. If we take this testimony as true, many of the inconsistencies in Lucy's case begin to unravel. It's possible Lucy was already dead before her alleged disappearance on July 25th. Yin may have disposed of her body and fabricated the abduction story to cover up the truth. As for who killed Lucy, it could have been Yin, Tammy, or both. The cause of death could range from extreme neglect to outright abuse. We have no way of knowing for sure. And if Yin and Tammy have managed to keep the truth hidden for over 28 years, it's unlikely they'll confess anytime soon. That said, the case remains open at the Goodlettsville Police Department. Who knows? Maybe another witness will come forward in the future. "Sabrina, come here. Come here, gorgeous." This is the first video Florida couple Steve and Marlene Eisenberg recorded of their nearly 5-month-old daughter, Sabrina. What they didn't know at the time was that it would also be the last. A day after this video, on November 23, 1997, the couple watched a Disney movie with their 3 kids and tucked them into bed. Marlene checked on Sabrina around midnight before going to sleep herself. But when she woke up the next morning, she was met with a horrifying sight. As I turned around, I noticed the laundry room door leading to the garage was open. Then, as I got closer, I saw the garage door was up, and I was looking straight out to the street, Marlene recalled. She immediately rushed to Sabrina's bedroom, which was closest to the garage. Unfortunately, it was already too late. I ran into Sabrina's room, looked in the crib, and she was gone. I just screamed and screamed. The shock and fear were evident in Marlene's frantic 911 call. 911 operator. 911. What's your emergency? Marlene, I need help. My baby's gone. Operator, okay, ma'am, calm down. Take a deep breath. What happened? Marlene, I just got up to wake my son up, and my garage door was wide open. My house door was open. My baby's gone. My baby is 5 months old. Oh God, help me. Upon closer inspection, the couple realized their own mistake had played a role in Sabrina's disappearance. They had forgotten to close the garage door the night before. As police got involved, they launched the largest manhunt in Florida history at the time. Investigators found a mysterious footprint and unidentified fingerprints near Sabrina's crib, which seemed to point to a kidnapping. But with no other leads, police shifted their focus inward, towards Steve and Marlene. The idea that someone could have walked into a suburban home in the middle of the night and taken a 5-month-old from her crib seemed far-fetched. As one investigator noted, it's unusual for a true kidnapping. A lot of times, we find out it's someone the family knew or had knowledge of. Sabrina's parents quickly became the lead suspects. They were subjected to extensive interviews and polygraph tests. While Steve passed his tests, Marlene's results were inconclusive due to the stress she was under. The police seemed determined to pin the crime on Steve and Marlene. At one point, they even instructed Marlene to appear cold and uncaring during a televised plea for Sabrina's return. Her emotional plea, "Please bring our baby back to us. She needs her mother and father. We all miss her and love her very much, and we need her to come home," backfired. Many viewers perceived her as unemotional, and law enforcement used this to question her sincerity. "It took all the strength I had to say what I said," Marlene later explained. "The minute I was done, I broke down in tears, hysterical. But of course, the cameras weren't on me then." Frustrated and feeling targeted, Steve and Marlene stopped cooperating with the police and hired an attorney. This only made things worse. On December 12, 1997, law enforcement received court permission to install hidden listening devices in the Eisenberg home. Over the next 3 months, these devices captured over 2,600 conversations. Police claimed they found evidence of the couple admitting to Sabrina's murder, including statements like, "Marlene, December 23, 1997, the baby's dead and buried. It was found dead because you did it. The baby's dead, no matter what you say. You just did it. Steve, honey, there was nothing I could do about it. We need to discuss how we can beat the charge. I will never break from the family pact and our story, even if the police hold me down. We'll do what we have to do." Steve, January 21, 1998, "I wish I hadn't harmed her. It was the cocaine." Police used these alleged transcripts as evidence to arrest the couple. However, when the recordings were presented in court, the judge couldn't clearly make out the incriminating phrases. The case was dismissed, and Steve and Marlene even won a countersuit, forcing the government to pay their attorney fees for what they called a bogus lawsuit. From my research, I'm fairly confident Steve and Marlene had nothing to do with Sabrina's disappearance. One of their former neighbors defended them in a YouTube comment, writing, "I lived about half a mile from the Eisenbergs at the time of this tragedy. We also had a 6-month-old baby boy. I immediately moved his crib into our master bedroom for a month after this happened. After hearing so much about the case and knowing someone who knew Marlene, I can say these folks could not have done it. They were genuinely wonderful parents and a decent, normal family. My heart goes out to them to this day. Our son is 25 now. Sabrina would be 25 this June. So sad. Sadly, while police focused on blaming Steve and Marlene, the real perpetrators slipped further from their grasp. It's been over 27 years since Sabrina disappeared, and it's unclear whether she's alive or met an untimely death. The Eisenbergs, however, have never given up hope. On February 14, 2000, in the small town of Shelby, North Carolina, 9-year-old Asha Degree vanished in the middle of the night. To this day, her disappearance remains one of the most baffling missing persons cases in American history. Let me walk you through what happened, or at least what we think happened, because even after more than 2 decades, there are more questions than answers. Asha was a shy, quiet girl who loved basketball and her family. She lived with her parents, Harold and Aquila Degree, and her older brother, O'Brien. By all accounts, she was a happy kid with no reason to run away. But on that cold February night, something prompted her to leave her home in the early hours of the morning during a heavy rainstorm. Around 2:30 a.m., 2 truck drivers reported seeing a small figure walking along Highway 18, wearing a white nightgown and carrying a backpack. At first, they thought it was a woman, but as they got closer, they realized it was a little girl. They tried to stop and help her, but she darted into the woods. Concerned, the drivers called the police, but by the time authorities arrived, the girl was gone. It wasn't until later that morning, when Asha's parents went to wake her up, that they realized she was missing. The search for Asha began immediately. Hundreds of volunteers, law enforcement officers, and even FBI agents scoured the area. They found a few clues, a candy wrapper, a hair bow, and some footprints leading into the woods. But despite their efforts, there was no sign of Asha. The most puzzling part of the case is why she left her home in the first place. It was the middle of the night, during a storm, and Asha was terrified of the dark. So what could have compelled her to walk out into the cold, rainy night? Theories abound. Some believe Asha was lured away by someone she knew or trusted. Others think she might have been running away from something, maybe a punishment or a misunderstanding at home. But her parents have always maintained that there was no reason for her to run away. They described her as a happy, well-adjusted child who had no history of behavioral issues. A year and a half after her disappearance, a construction crew working on a highway about 30 miles from Shelby made a chilling discovery: a backpack buried in a plastic bag. Inside were Asha's belongings, including her name written on a sheet of paper, a Dr. Seuss book, and a New Kids on the Block t-shirt. The backpack had been double-wrapped in trash bags, suggesting someone had gone to great lengths to hide it. But how did it get there? And who put it there? The FBI analyzed the backpack and its contents, but no new leads emerged. Over the years, investigators have followed up on countless tips, but none have brought them closer to finding Asha. Her case remains open, and her family continues to hold out hope that one day they'll find out what happened to her. One of the most haunting aspects of this case is the timeline. Asha disappeared on Valentine's Day, a day associated with love and connection. Instead, her family was left with a void that has never been filled. Every year, on February 14th, they hold a vigil to honor her memory and keep her story alive. Asha's disappearance has sparked countless theories and debates. Was she abducted by a stranger? Did she run away for reasons we'll never understand? Or was there something more sinister at play? The truth is, we may never know. But what we do know is that Asha Degree was a little girl who deserved to grow up, chase her dreams, and live a full life. And until her case is solved, her story will remain a heartbreaking reminder of the mysteries that can haunt even the smallest of towns. On August 8, 2013, a 26-year-old man named Brandon Lawson vanished under bizarre circumstances in the middle of the night in West Texas. His disappearance has become one of the most puzzling and talked about missing persons cases in recent years. What makes it so strange? Well, it all started with a frantic 911 call that left more questions than answers. Brandon was a father of 4 who lived in San Angelo, Texas. On the night he disappeared, he had been arguing with his girlfriend, Ladessa Lofton. Around midnight, he left their home in a hurry, saying he was going to his father's house in Crowley, about an hour and a half away. But he never made it there. About 30 minutes into his drive, Brandon ran out of gas near the small town of Bronte, Texas. He called his brother, Kyle, asking for help. Kyle agreed to bring him some gas, but by the time he arrived, Brandon was nowhere to be found. What Kyle did find, though, was Brandon's truck, parked awkwardly on the side of the road with the driver's door open. There was no sign of Brandon. Now, here's where things get really strange. While Brandon was waiting for his brother, he made a 911 call. The call is hard to make out in some parts, but it's clear that Brandon was panicked. Here's a transcript of part of the call. Brandon, yes, I'm in the middle of a field. A guy chased me into the woods. Please hurry. 911 operator, okay. Now run that by me one more. Brandon, I'm in the middle of a field. Some guys are chasing me. I'm not talking to them. I'm totally hidden. 911 operator, okay. What's your name? Brandon Lawson. 911 operator, Brandon Lawson, okay. And you said someone's chasing you? Brandon, yes, I accidentally ran into them. I ran into them. I'm not talking to them. I'm not talking to them. I need the cops. The call cuts in and out, and some parts are muffled, but Brandon can be heard saying things like, I'm out here going toward Abilene on both sides, and my truck ran out of gas. There's one car here. A guy's chasing me into the woods. At one point, he even says, I'm bleeding. Then the call abruptly ends. When police arrived, they searched the area but found no trace of Brandon. They did, however, find his cell phone, keys, and wallet in his truck. Over the next few days, search teams combed the area, including nearby fields and woods, but they found nothing. It was as if Brandon had vanished into thin air. Theories about what happened to Brandon are all over the map. Some people think he was involved in something shady, maybe drugs or a confrontation with someone he knew. Others believe he was disoriented, possibly under the influence, and wandered off into the wilderness, where he succumbed to the elements. Then there are those who think foul play was involved, pointing to the cryptic nature of his 911 call as evidence that he was being chased or threatened. One of the most puzzling aspects of the case is the 911 call itself. Why was Brandon so panicked? Who was chasing him? And why did he mention bleeding? Some people have speculated that he might have been hallucinating or experiencing a mental break, but his family insists that wasn't like him. In the years since his disappearance, Brandon's family has worked tirelessly to keep his case in the public eye. They've organized searches, created social media pages, and even appeared on podcasts and TV shows to share his story. Despite their efforts, no solid leads have ever emerged. In 2022, nearly 9 years after Brandon vanished, there was a glimmer of hope. Human remains were found in a remote area near where Brandon was last seen. The remains were sent for DNA testing, but as of now, there's been no confirmation that they belong to Brandon. His family continues to hold out hope that one day they'll get answers. Brandon's disappearance is one of those cases that sticks with you. It's a reminder of how quickly life can change and how fragile our sense of safety really is. What happened to Brandon Lawson that night? Did he run into trouble? Was he a victim of foul play? Or did he simply get lost in the vast Texas wilderness? Until we know for sure, his story will remain a haunting mystery.